So it's difficult for people to get home for Christmas this year, and they really want to start booking. So I think leaving it at the end of November is going to be very tight for people.
Not only that, but we're supposed to have an indication on November the 8th. That has been pushed back already. What that signals for those outside the room is that there's a hell of a debate going on, Keith, within the Cabinet room as to how far they go in the opposite direction of what the medical people are telling them. The medical people, as I say, want to be more hardline. They want travel kept at the most restrictive level. There are a couple of signs that that is not being followed as closely as it has been in the past. One of them came this week when the Department of Foreign Affairs, without an announcement, changed the travel rating on all 200 countries in the world from level 3, put it down to level 2. Big issue there because it now means that travel insurance covers people who are flying abroad. As most listeners will know, the flights are still continuing. It's just that the government is telling the airlines they can fly and the passengers they cannot.
It really is confusing. But what if you had a big crystal ball, Eoghan, at this stage? Yeah. What can you see happening at Christmas time? If people that are based, say, in France or London or Spain or the States, indeed, do you reckon they'll be at the fireside with their family this Christmas?
They will certainly have the services to do so. I'll come back to the regional airlines, regional airports in a moment. It's interesting they're reopening in the 2 weeks before Christmas, but the long-term picture for them ain't good. But back to that crystal ball, the possibility of being with your family at Christmas is there. The problem is, will the self-quarantine be as strictly applied as it is? We've always kept the flights open, Keith. There are 7,000 people going through Dublin Airport every day. That's down from over 16,000 during August, and it's a tiny fraction of what would normally be going through. But the flights are still allowed to fly. The problem, and the airlines are bleating this repeatedly, is that while telling the airlines they can fly and the passengers they cannot, it means that they're not viable. And what we would probably see at Christmas, we can see one of two things. We can see restrictions being relaxed to allow families to connect, or we will see a breakdown in the compliance, that people will travel and either cope with the self-isolation, but in a lot of cases, companies are telling people you're not going to be paid for 2 weeks after you return home. Yeah. So we can go either of those directions. I think the political decision will be made. Do we say to our population, and remember, this is not the Ireland you or I grew up in. 17% of Ireland's people, 17% of us were born abroad. So what used to be in the old days, Irish families getting back from London, is now Polish families getting back to Poland or bringing relatives over. The politicians know the scale of what they're facing. Will they decide to take the medical advice and brazen it out and tell people they cannot reconnect for this Christmas? Because it's quite clear this is not going away and we've no idea what's happening in 2021.
Although the big question is, we're looking at two forms of testing. And surely if they can try and expedite the whole testing side of things, and again, there's a company, we're dealing with it later on, and they're doing private testing. But surely if they look at the antigen test and the other tests that they have and speed that whole process up, people might be able to travel and maybe not have to self-isolate.
Everybody wants testing, Keith, and there's no shortage of people selling the systems. There are quite a lot of them, a lot of options. Dublin Airport already have put 3 testing facilities in place. Quite interesting, they've applied for planning permission for those and have not been granted it yet, which may indicate a bit of heel dragging on the government side. There's no doubt that the medical professionals, a lot of them are familiar names now to listeners, all say that they're not confident enough with testing to think that travel should resume on a large scale. And there again, we have the dichotomy. Politically, there are lots of testing options. Other countries are using them. Italy are using them for certain inbound passengers. Germany are using them for PCR testing in the airport, which comes free. Then if you need a second test, you have to pay for that. That seems to be working. But our testing capacity, there's already questions, Keith, which you've covered in your own programme, about testing capacity within Ireland, within the system as it stands. And And even with a private company coming in and saying, we'll test the huge numbers involved here, because, 110,000 in a month would be, in 110,000 in a week would be, more than half of that would be taken up by airport testing. But even if it's taken out onto the private side and is regarded as extra to the testing that we have within the system, which is inadequate, it is going to put pressure on even the medical personnel, the trained medical personnel, to do the testing. The testing that is being well flouted, and the aviation industry, as I say, the airlines, everybody wants testing quickly, get things back as normal. The real problem is implementing it to the standard that wins the confidence of the medical professionals. And that isn't just a matter for the testing company, that's also a matter of having trained personnel in place.
All right, Corry, thank you for joining us today on the programme.